After the results of Wild Card Weekend, there's one clear move the New York Jets should make in their coaching search, but I'm not sure they're going to make it. Let's talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, January 13th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. There are plenty of developments to discuss in the Jets' search for a new head coach and a new general manager. The guy who had been the front runner is now officially off the table. But I think the results of Wild Card Weekend should at least lead the Jets to inquire about a new candidate. And that is a candidate who lost his wild card game. That candidate potentially would be Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin. The Steelers had an awful end to their season. They lost their final 4 regular season games. It was right at the point their schedule started to pick up in intensity. It was a very tough finish for Pittsburgh. They played 4 very tough teams and then a 5th team in Baltimore where they lost in the wild card round. Pittsburgh had a bad end to the season. I think the Steelers were kind of exposed because the Steelers got off to a 10-3 start. And then once the schedule got tough, they just simply could not hold up. And this has led to a lot of discontent in Pittsburgh among fans and media to the point where there is now speculation. You can hear it from NFL insiders that teams are going to call the Pittsburgh Steelers and at least inquire about the availability of Mike Tomlin. And Tomlin has been the coach in Pittsburgh since 2007. He won a Super Bowl his second season. 2 years later, he went to a second Super Bowl, which they lost to Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. And things have, to an extent, stagnated since then. Now, the Steelers have never been bad. In fact, Tomlin's been the head coach in Pittsburgh since 2007. And that team has never had a losing season under his watch. But it's been a while since they've been contenders, which has led to this discontent. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm skeptical that the Steelers actually would make Mike Tomlin available. He is under contract, and he apparently has no trade clause also. So he would need to approve any trade that the Steelers made. But this is clearly a candidate the Jets should be interested in if he is available. And I think it behooves the Jets to at least inquire about that. And, it's really funny because whenever there's rumors about some player becoming available, one of my least favorite phrases that people use is you need to make the call. Because, most of the time these people aren't available. And I'm not sure if Pittsburgh's necessarily going to make Tomlin available. The thing about the Steelers is, unlike other teams like the Jets, just because there's a big outcry among fans and the media for them to do something, that doesn't mean that they automatically do it. The Steelers are focused on winning games, not making their fans and the media happy in the short run. Again, that's a very stark contrast to the New York Jets, as we've seen over the last several seasons. And the Steelers are maybe the most stable organization in all of professional sports. They've only had 3 coaches in over 50 years. Chuck Noll, who won 4 Super Bowls, Bill Cowher, who won a Super Bowl in 2005, and then Mike Tomlin, who won a Super Bowl in 2008. This is not a team that makes changes haphazardly. This is not a team that makes changes on a whim. So I am skeptical that the Steelers would actually make Tomlin available. But if other teams are going to make this inquiry, the Jets certainly should make the inquiry because above all else, I think what the New York Jets really need in a head coach is a culture changer. They need somebody who's going to come in and, I know these can be buzzwords, but, instill in accountability, not accept losing. Because I think in this organization, in many ways, losing has become acceptable and losing has become excused. And that simply cannot be the case. And Mike Tomlin's a guy who, again, has never had a losing season as a head coach. Now, you can go crazy with that. Again, they haven't been a team that's been a big-time contender in quite a while. But I think it says something. The fact that Tomlin has never had a losing season. He's been the coach since 2007. Because there have been years where the Steelers' quarterback situation has been ugly. There were years where Ben Roethlisberger went down and missed a lot of games. And then there was a very uneven stretch after Roethlisberger retired. But, they tried to draft Kenny Pickett, which really did not work out. And while the Steelers weren't a great team, I think they did not underperform. And you can make a strong case that they've overperformed a number of times since Tomlin became the head coach. Now, why do fans want him out then? Well, I think if anybody's a head coach for long enough and you get the sense that they're stagnating, fans get frustrated. I mean, this happened with Andy Reid near the end of his tenure in Philadelphia. The fans wanted him out. They felt like they needed a change. Well, you can't say it's gone poorly for the Eagles because the Eagles obviously have won a Super Bowl since Reid left. They went to another Super Bowl. They're a contender. They've been a very good team for the most part. But I don't think if those fans could look back, I don't think they would if they could do it all over again. I don't think they would have wanted to have fired Reid. Sometimes you don't appreciate what you have. I know some Steelers fans and they complain about Tomlin, and I say, you guys don't understand what a problem is, what it is to have a problem as a football fan if you're complaining about Mike Tomlin, because I would gladly take him. And he's the type of guy, there are no excuses with Mike Tomlin. Is he the greatest coach in the league? No. But this is, one of the challenges for the New York Jets during this search is that, I've described the coach they need. They don't need some like hotshot offensive mind. They don't need, some players coach. They don't need the next hot college guy, the next hot college coordinator. What they need is a guy who's going to go in and change the culture. And that's been one of the challenges, is that that guy doesn't exist this year. Jim Harbaugh was available if the Jets had fired Robert Saleh last year, which is one of many reasons the Jets should have fired Robert Saleh last year. And one of the many reasons not firing Saleh last year was a mistake. 2 years ago, Sean Payton was available. And, Denver lost yesterday, obviously, to Buffalo. But that Broncos team exceeded all expectations this year by making the playoffs. Mike Tomlin would be that coach of that caliber. He would, any team that acquired him would likely need to trade for him. I don't know what you would have to give up to get him. Obviously, there is a price for everybody. You don't want to overpay for a coach, but this is exactly the type of coach the Jets need. So while I'm skeptical he'll be available, if other teams are going to inquire about his availability, the Jets should. And the Jets should be players. And I don't expect the Jets to do this. If the Jets do, I think it'll be a very cursory thing. And they'll say, well, we were turned down. Or if Tom, I don't think the Jets have the wherewithal to pull off something like this, because a move like this requires people in charge who've got real savvy, guys who understand how to operate under the radar, people who understand how to keep things discreet, and people who know how to execute a move like this. Because any move like this, it would be difficult to do in broad daylight. It's difficult to negotiate things like this in public. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, something like this would need to be executed, and you would need to find out as soon as when the deal was done. It would need to be kept out of the media until it was done. And I think it's fair to say the Jets do not have leadership with that degree of savvy. And that's one of the reasons, 2 years ago, they didn't make back channel negotiations with Sean Payton. That's one of the reasons the Jets have never really been involved with Jim Harbaugh when they've had a chance to land him. The Jets are always, whenever the Jets are searching for a coach, you always hear that you always would hear that they were interested in Harbaugh at the points where there was no chance they'd get Harbaugh. At any point where Harbaugh was available, the Jets were nowhere to be found, because again, to land a coach like this, it requires a degree of execution. It requires a degree of savvy that the people running the Jets simply don't have. So I'm pessimistic, first of all, that the Steelers would make Tomlin available. Even if they did, I'm pessimistic that the Jets have the leadership with the degree of smarts to pull it off. But I think the Jets should definitely inquire about Mike Tomlin, because you look at the rest of the candidates in this search. I mean, there are some guys who are okay, but there's really nobody who wows you. I mean, that's true. That's true of every single candidate. I mean, there are candidates I like better than others, but I don't think there's a slam dunk choice out there. Mike Tomlin would be the slam dunk choice. I'm just not sure the Jets would be really that interested in making the moves that you need to. I'm sure the Jets would be interested in getting Tomlin, but I don't think the Jets are interested in doing what it takes to get Tomlin. Hopefully I'm wrong, though. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there is some news on the head coaching search. There's a candidate who widely was reported as the top candidate who is out, but it's not a big surprise. Mike Vrabel, no longer an option for the Jets. Let's talk about it as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. And that's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for your job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high quality candidates. Maybe the Jets should use LinkedIn as they search for the next head coach and general manager. That would have to be an improvement over what they've done in the past. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these last weeks of football. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions of winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. And here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code Locked On NFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON NFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. A development yesterday on the Jets head coaching search, which was not a shock. In fact, in some ways, it kind of felt like a formality. Mike Vrabel will not be the next head coach of the New York Jets. Instead, he will be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. Vrabel, of course, is a former Patriots player. He spent most of his career in New England, along with a couple of stops in Pittsburgh and a stop in Kansas City. Vrabel was widely viewed as the Jets' top choice. He seemed like the people the Jets decision makers liked the best. But this is not a surprise. I felt like Vrabel was gettable for the New York Jets if New England was not an option. Because it felt like the Jets were the team that was really desperate, and rightly so. And Vrabel came with some very specific asks because, first of all, again, there were not a lot of great proven candidates available. Vrabel was available at the right year for him. In another year, Vrabel might not have been the top tier choice, but just there was no real big fish. And to the extent that there was a head coach available in this cycle who actually had a proven track record in the job of NFL head coach, it was Vrabel. So he was able to kind of pick and choose. He was the Jets' top choice. He may have been the top choice in another spot or one or two other spots. But I think once that New England job became available, it was going to be very difficult for any other team to get him again because he has ties with the organization and ties with the owner. I was watching the Gerard Mayo situation closely because I think if Gerard Mayo had stuck around for another year, Jets would have had a very good shot at landing Mike Vrabel. Now, I don't think anybody should be crushed over losing Mike Vrabel because, look, I don't think he was a slam dunk candidate. I don't think he was of the caliber of a Jim Harbaugh or a Sean Payton or Mike Tomlin. I think he was the best choice available. I think he was the most proven guy available. And the reason that I wanted him above the other candidates was simply, first of all, I don't trust the people in charge of the Jets. I don't trust the ownership to be able to scout out who's the next coordinator who's going to be a great head coach. I think they've proven time and again that they're not very good at projecting who's going to be a good head coach. So in Vrabel, you at least had a guy who had proven he could do the job before. Second of all is to the extent there was a culture changer out there, to the extent there was the type of guy that I was hoping the Jets could land, it seemed like Vrabel was like the guy who fit that description the best. He was the guy who had done it in Tennessee. He was the guy who's had a year off to kind of think about how good organizations are built. And he apparently came in with a list of demands, which I think is a positive. I think any candidate the Jets bring in should have a list of requirements for the job, because unless ownership does certain things, the coach will not have a chance to succeed. So the coach needs to understand what those things are. Vrabel, by all accounts, did come in with that list of asks. It sounds like things went well when he met with the Jets. It's just very difficult because he's got ties with the owner in New England. With the Jets, it sounds like he was going to ask for the Jets to hire the GM of his choice. And I think that would have been a fair ask. In New England, when you have a trust with the owner, it's a little bit easier to take the job, even if you're not choosing the GM. And Look, I don't think Robert Kraft has exactly covered himself in glory these last couple of years. I think it's very fair to question how good of an owner Robert Kraft has been over the last several seasons. But at the end of the day, I think most people, and especially somebody who had a long playing career with New England, is going to choose working for Robert Kraft over Woody Johnson. That's despite all of the issues New England has had in recent seasons. Look, I'm not going to sit here and act like I thought Vrabel was the slam dunk hire. I don't think he was the greatest hire. I think he was the best of a group of choices that had a lot of question marks. But I think if you look at Vrabel's time in Tennessee, it was kind of a mixed bag when you talk about who did he hire on the offensive side of the football. There were some excellent hires. He hired Matt LaFleur as his first offensive coordinator upon being hired. His second offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, went on to be a head coach in this league. And while Arthur Smith is not a very good head coach, the fact that he got a head coaching job suggests he was a very good coordinator. But there were also some very shaky hires on the offensive side of the ball. Todd Downing, who works for the Jets. Keith Carter on the offensive line, who works for the Jets, a guy who I've spent countless hours, countless shows complaining about. So I think it's fair to question Vrabel from that perspective. I also wonder what his offense is going to look like because in Tennessee, it was a very run-heavy based offense. Now, you look at the roster he had those years. He had Derrick Henry. His quarterbacks were Marcus Mariota and Ryan Tannehill. It would make sense to be a run-heavy offense in that situation. The question is this a philosophical thing for Vrabel? Or is it the type of thing where he saw the personnel and maybe he's not necessarily in a neutral situation going to be run-heavy, but because of the personnel he had, he decided to be run-heavy? I think that's an open question. I think that's a fair question. I also say that, while I think Vrabel was successful in Tennessee, it's not like he was like top of the league. It's not like he's Andy Reid in Kansas City. It's not even like he's Sean McDermott in Buffalo. They had some good seasons. They had 4 winning seasons in 6 years. They had a trip to the AFC Championship game in 2019. They had an 11-win season in 2021 that led to a 1 seed. But it's not like the team was, consistently an elite Super Bowl contending team. It was a team that was always pretty good. It's not like Vrabel took that team to the top. Now, the second time around, sometimes those coaches who were good the first time around become great. Sometimes they can't match the same level of success in the second city. So, I think that of the candidates available this cycle, he probably was the most proven. And I think for the Jets, that brought a lot of appeal. But I don't think that this was the type of guy. This was not a can't miss type of coaching prospect. This was not, Bill Parcells in 1997. This was a guy who was a good coach, a guy who did good things in Tennessee, but not a guy who is a lock to be great by any stretch of the imagination in New England, and not a guy who was a lock to be great by any stretch of the imagination in New York. This is, look, I mean, I'm not going to use I don't want to use the phrase, this is not going to destroy the franchise, because how can you destroy something that's already been destroyed? I think Vrabel could have done good things here, but I'm not totally convinced. I think the best way I can put it is I'm not completely sold that Vrabel would have been great. I just think that the other candidates have higher odds of failing. That's why I wanted him. But I think, once the Jets got into a situation where it was them in New England, it was going to be next to impossible to get Mike Vrabel. I think the Jets actually could have beaten out other teams because the Jets could have given him more control over personnel than other teams. But once New England was involved, that was pretty much it. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll close out our show and we'll talk about some other developments. There are a couple of rumored front runners right now. Difficult to know what these rumors really mean, but we do, and a couple other candidates who interviewed over the weekend. We'll get to all that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The opening weekend of the NFL playoffs concludes tonight as the Rams face the Vikings in Arizona. 5 games in the books. I got to say, not the greatest opening weekend. Now, the Sunday night game, the Washington-Tampa Bay game, was very exciting. The first 4 games, not super exciting. Well, maybe things will pick up in the divisional round. We have got a great matchup between Baltimore and Buffalo. Again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Monday, we're talking about the Jets' search for a new head coach and a new general manager. Couple of recent developments. There's a lot of buzz behind a specific general manager and head coach combo. In fact, over the weekend, two beat writers speculated, and I'm not sure this is pure speculation. I think they're hearing from sources inside the building that there's momentum behind the idea of Ryan Grigson as the general manager and Brian Flores as the head coach. And both of these guys right now work with the Minnesota Vikings organization. This news has brought a lot of consternation within the fan base, I sense, because these are two candidates who are relatively unpopular, particularly Grigson. And I can understand the frustration with Grigson because Grigson had a 5-year run as general manager of the Indianapolis Colts, which was just frankly terrible. He was gifted Andrew Luck. He inherited a draft pick, number 1 overall in 2012, which was Andrew Luck. And it was the most obvious pick in the world. Andrew Luck is probably still the best quarterback prospect of the 21st century. And Grigson went on to not only not have success with the Colts with Andrew Luck, but also built an offensive line so bad that Andrew Luck got banged up. And Andrew Luck, because of these injuries, Andrew Luck retired way prematurely. Now, there were some successful seasons in Indianapolis under Grigson because Luck pretty much lifted the team on his back a couple of times. But Grigson did a miserable job in Indianapolis, and I understand that there are a lot of Jets fans who are concerned about him being hired. I think that if the Jets hired Ryan Grigson, I would have skepticism about it. Now, it's been a long time since his Indianapolis tenure ended. There's always a question. What did you learn from it, and how have you grown since then? Because Grigson was let go by the Colts, after the 2016 season. So that was a long time ago. We're going to head into the 2025 season. So Grigson's had time to learn, to get some distance. He's now working with the Vikings, who seem like a very well-run organization. So from that standpoint, I think maybe my mind would be open, but I think it would be fair to have skepticism if the Jets did bring in Ryan Grigson. I do like the idea of bringing in two guys who are aligned, though. I like the idea of bringing in two guys from the same organization because you want the GM and coach to be on the same page. And that's something that hasn't always happened with the Jets in the Johnson era. As far as Brian Flores goes, I have to say I'm really surprised with the negativity in the fan base for Flores. I'm not saying Brian Flores is a perfect coach, but first of all, he's one of the best defensive minds in the league. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Second of all, he's a guy who holds people accountable, and heaven knows we need some of that in this organization. But you look at his tenure in Miami. He really only had a competitive roster twice, and both those years he had a winning record. It seems like a lot of the negativity for Flores is based on like some interview Tua Tagovailoa gave that Tua didn't like him. And I mean, the players not liking you only counts for so much. The guy who replaced him in Miami, Mike McDaniel, is like a media darling. Like everybody loves Mike McDaniel. Everybody thinks Mike McDaniel is a great coach. Well, I don't know if Miami's been that much more successful under McDaniel than they were under Flores. I think that the issues in Miami are different now, but everybody loves Mike McDaniel, but there are all these reports in Miami out of that they had discipline problems this year. So, sometimes the players liking the coach isn't the best thing in the world. And sometimes the players disliking the coach isn't the worst thing in the world. The big issue with Flores in Miami, beyond relating with players, was he could never really figure out the offensive coordinator spots. I think coming from Minnesota, that could be a positive because Minnesota is a team coached by Kevin O'Connell. So first of all, Flores in his time with the Vikings has had time to observe what a good offense can do, what a modern offense can look like. But he also has gotten ties to coaches who run modern offenses. A Flores head coach, Josh McCown offensive coordinator combination, I think would be really intriguing for the Jets. So I can't say I'm wild about the idea of a potential Grigson-Flores combo, but that's mainly because of Grigson. And even then, I would probably give him a chance because he's so far removed from his tenure in Indianapolis. I think I would be fair to be skeptical of a move like that, but I don't think it would be I don't think it would be like the absolute dismal move that people are making it out to be. And I got to be honest with you, I think people are too hard on Flores. I don't want to make Brian Flores out to be the greatest coach in the league, but there was never a year in Miami where that team underachieved its talent, and there was a year or two where they overachieved. So I can't get behind people. It's not like this wouldn't be like hiring Adam Gase. This would be hiring a guy who was actually pretty decently successful in his first stop, a guy who actually brings a lot of qualities that the Jets need, like discipline and structure. So I don't know that I necessarily am on board with the dislike of Flores. Jets also interviewed 5 GM candidates on Saturday. Trey Brown from Cincinnati, Chris Spielman from Detroit, Grigson himself, along with a couple other guys, Lance Newmark in the Washington organization, and Darren Moogie of the Broncos organization. So these were very short interviews, which I would guess means that this is like the first round, and they're just trying to kind of cut down on the guys who really didn't do a very good job. And you'd have to imagine there'd be a second round of interviews, because it's difficult to imagine there's nothing that difficult to imagine the Jets doing, but it's difficult to imagine like you'd hand the keys over to your entire football operation based on like an hour and a half to 2 hours. My guess is that it seems like the Jets have cast a very wide net, and now they'll cut it down after the first round of interviews. They'll cut out the guys that clearly are just not the right person. I would guess that they'd bring in guys for second round interviews. Jets also expanded their coaching search on Friday. They brought in University of Maryland coach Mike Locksley, and I have to say that's a surprising one. Now, Locksley did interview with the Dolphins 2 years ago after Flores was fired in the search that ended up leading to the Dolphins hiring Mike McDaniel. I find it difficult to believe Locksley would be a candidate for this job. He's coming off a 4-8 season. His record is under 500 in Maryland. And look, sometimes guys are better suited for the NFL than college. So sometimes you can't always like look at the college record and say that it's going to translate to the NFL, because they're two very different games. Some guys are just better suited for the NFL than college, but Locksley's worked his entire career in college. He doesn't even have like experience as an assistant position coach in the NFL. So an unlikely hire, I would think. I think unless he hit that interview out of the park, I would have to imagine Mike Locksley's not going to be not going to be a serious candidate for the Jets. And you get to a point with some of these interviews, some of these guys they bring in, and you wonder like whether Spielman and Tannenbaum are just like doing agents favors with some of these, because if you're Mike Locksley's agent, you're a hero because you got him a head coaching interview. And now maybe like in the future, if that agent deals with Tannenbaum or Spielman, like they'll have some, they will have earned some good grace, or maybe it's something like that, because it's a very surprising interview. I can't imagine Locksley, again, unless he like absolutely just crushed his interview. It's very difficult for me to envision Mike Locksley being anything approaching a serious candidate, but Jets do expand their search. And we'll see. There might be another surprise interview or two along the way. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.